Welcome to the Squared Circle Pit with your host, Rob Pasbani.
Now entering the Squared Circle Pit, he is the founder of Morbid Angel. He is a legendary death metal vocalist. His project, I Am Morbid, is touring all over the world in 2024. I'm very excited to have David Vincent enter the Square Circle Pit. Thank you, David, for joining us.
Well, I'll tell you something, brother. Great to talk to you again on one of my favorite subjects, as a matter of fact.
Absolutely. I'm so glad we made this happen. I've wanted to talk to you about pro wrestling for a really, really long time. Now, I know I know Morbid Angel, got their start around in the Florida area. Are you from Florida? Are you from the South? Where were you born?
I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is the original home of Jim Crockett Promotions and the NWA.
Okay, so you were in the heart of Flair country, right? Do you have do you remember your earliest wrestling memory?
Well, I do, but I literally grew up right down the street from Ric Flair. He lived in the same neighborhood as my folks.
Oh, that's amazing. What was that like? What was he like out of the ring?
A really, really kind gentleman. I mean, we all had... you remember those Schwinn chopper bicycles that had a little wheel up front, a big wheel in the back, and a sissy bar and the gear shift down the middle? This might be before your time. So we all had these bikes that we were, kind of doing stuff with, and we'd ride over to his house, and he had his garage kind of set up with a gym. We'd ride over there just to, hey, dude, what's up? And, we're just kids. And he'd come out there. He goes, we can make those bars cooler. And he'd come out and adjust our handlebars for us. And be like, oh, cool. Just a really nice guy. And I still have all this respect for him in the world. I don't think he's been outdone, to be honest with you, for what he does.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's one of the all-time greats in the ring, easily. So I guess being in Charlotte, like wrestling was a big part of your childhood. It's safe to say? Well,
yeah. I remember the very first time I saw it. I was actually babysitting for my younger brothers, and my parents, they wanted to go out and do whatever they did. So that was just an excuse for me to stay up late and watch TV and get paid to do so. Well, I'm clicking around the channels, and I remember coming across a wrestling program. And normally, boxing, that kind of, I didn't really care about it. But when I saw literally this guy hitting another guy in the head with a metal trash can, and there's, of course, there's blood all over the place, I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And my dad got home, and I was trying to explain it to him. I said, I saw this. It was like a boxing, but it wasn't. And these guys were just, hitting each other with trash cans and everything else. And that's just a bunch of fake nonsense. And that's not real blood. They just have blood packets. And, he was so dismissive. And, it kind of, I was like, well, have you ever seen this? I mean, he was intent on, what he thought. And I don't know, it just kind of sparked something in me. And as I began to sort of really understand the whole, dare I say, carny aspect of it, it made me appreciate it more. And then fast forward, my takeaway from that was almost sort of etched in stone when I read Mick Foley's book about the whole world is faker than pro wrestling. And I thought to myself, that was a really good book, and he's a smart guy as well. And it's so, the storytelling, at least in the old days, was so important. And it just has highs and lows. I mean, they said it was the redneck male soap opera, and I can't say that I disagree with that. But it's an art form, and how do you tell a story in a ring? And later on in life, the more I learned about the sport, and I'm still going to call it a sport, because regardless of whether or not a given outcome is predetermined, if you're getting thrown off the top rope out into the concrete floor, you're getting thrown out off the top rope and on a concrete floor. Now, if you know how to land, great. If you don't, sorry about your bad luck. But it is very athletic, and it's in a strange way. I don't even know how to say this. It almost reminds me of like a Wagnerian opera, where there's you have the hero and the anti-hero. And there's this story, and they do, it just tells the story. Now, in a much simpler form than that, but that's what I get out of it.
Yeah, in its basic form, it's like a morality play with good triumphing over evil and how they get there.
Well, or the other way around.
Or the other way around, right? Yes, ultimately, you would think.
Really, I look at anything that I'm a fan of that I like. I really get in deep about it, be it music or film or art of any kind. That's who I am as a person. So I've really enjoyed it my entire life.
That's awesome. And did you attend any shows as a kid? I know you said your dad wasn't too hot on it, but what was your upfront?
Well, all of this was before, gosh, I'm really dating myself now, before cable TV. So what we had on just the local channels in Charlotte, it was NWA, there was a couple programs, and then IWA as well. So I got to see a lot that, some of the wrestling magazines, some of them were more towards what the McMahons had going on, but we didn't have any, I'd see people in magazines, but I would never see them on TV because it was back when it was very regional. And dare I say that was the glory days of it, because every now and then someone would sort of go on a tour and visit some of these other promotions and, work for a month or so. And it was a big family, even though there were separate promotions that, probably didn't get along as well as they may have. But yeah, I mean, that was happening all over. I mean, there was what was happening in Texas at the time with the Von Erichs, what was happening in Charlotte, which also kind of translated down into Florida, even though there's people who worked in Florida who didn't make their way up to the mid-Atlantic area. And then you had AWA, and then you had IWA, and then you had, it was WWWF way back in the day.
Right. So did you saw Mil Mascaras perform at all, or like some of those old school lucha guys? I could
bring up some names that were, from back in the day, who I actually did see. I did see Bruder Brody live. I did see Abdullah the Butcher. Did see Ox Baker. Did see all of that old school stuff. And it was, again, what there is today. Unfortunately, at least with the big feds. It's almost more of a cartoon than it is what I fell in love with as a kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can understand where you're coming from with that. And obviously, there was an extreme element to it. Do you feel like in any way it affected like how you presented yourself as a front man? Like you kind of took when you're on stage, obviously you're in a way performing as a character, like a heightened version of your real self. You're not the David Vincent at home. You're the performer. So do you find yourself take on a wrestling persona in a sense when you're performing?
Not exactly in that sense, but as far as being inspired by it, absolutely.
Yeah. And at what point did you start getting into playing music and rock music? And was it after you had already been a wrestling fan?
Oh yeah. I would say I started music when I was really young, not at the point where it was something that I took as seriously as I did later in life. But yeah, I feel like anything that has to do with entertainment kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah,
it's just another form of expression, and folks doing their job. A lot of times, and to this day, I'll go to small house shows here and there, and I'll communicate with the various workers in such a way where they kind of get it. So I'll start yelling at the ref and turning to my neighbor. Did you see that? He didn't call that. They got cheating. And the little old ladies, yeah, he cheated. It just gets everybody more into it. And then it makes, the guys in the ring work a little harder. And there's just kind of, it's almost a community kind of a thing. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
But
I think so. I think the fans are a huge part of the show. If the like you said, if the fans are reacting the way the wrestlers want them to react, which it sounds like you're doing, it enhances everything and everyone gets more into it.
It makes them have a better time.
Yeah. I kind of hate when there's those trolls that come to shows that just try to make the show about them and they have like the smart chants and it's like, get out of here. Like nobody likes you. This isn't what this is about.
It's something where, again, I remember like these old ladies in wheelchairs when I was a kid, and they'd be up there, and when the bad guy quote unquote got out of the ring, they'd be like throwing stuff at them, and you know, like they really, they bought it hook, line, and sinker, and that made it more entertaining for me. Is just
absolutely, yeah.
It's kind of, you know, it's almost like it's a saga in its own sort of way.
Old ladies and children are the best type of people to be sitting next to at wrestling shows.
Sure.
I would occasionally go to the WWE Christmas house shows that they have in Madison Square Garden because I'm here in New York. And you know, WWE, like you're saying, like for me, I'm a bit more jaded about the style that they perform. It's a little slower. I understand why, but you know, like I like a little more action. But if I'm sitting next to kids where it's like their first show and it's their first time seeing Rey Mysterio, it changes my cynical mood to where I'm watching it through their eyes, and it makes it so much more fun. It's like this really is what it's about.
Yeah, and somehow, you know, gosh, I don't want to be negative, but we've lost something, and the writing is not, you know, is not Vince Russo anymore, and the, you know, you have to have a star in order to put something over. And some of the biggest guys that you know did the best mic work. I mean, Flair never had script. They just said Tony Schiavone and what have you, or David Crockett would just literally put the mic in his direction, and it's almost like press the button and go. And you know, he just go off on tangents and just, you know, he had the ability to do that, and a lot of guys just they don't. I mean, they're you know, physically in good shape, and you know, they know how to work. They just don't have the mic skills, and in such a way, whether it's, you know, good, bad, or indifferent, even if it's the dumbest thing in the world, sometimes that can be endearing, as opposed to just boring or just you know, sort of passé. Like somebody could be really, you know, some of these gimmicks that people come up with, and the way they can kind of add that to their character. Dustin Rhodes, Goldust, perfect example. I was on a plane on the way over to Europe, and there was a whole bunch of, I guess they had a European show coming up, so the plane was filled with workers, right? I don't know whether this is where he came up with it, but you know, I wasn't sitting too far from this group, and he started that whole stuttering thing that he did for a while.
Oh, yes.
When he'd be like, and he'd get hung up on a word that was like the most vulgar thing in the world, and then be able to skip over that and move into, you know, that sort of Tourette's kind of thing that he added to his character. Completely brilliant and creative. And where he ended up going with it, and the fact that everybody, they embraced it and they allowed him to do it. Because who's going to write that kind of stuff? This is just stuff that just comes out of thin air. And it's magic as, you know, writing a book or composing a song, creating these things that are sort of ongoing like that.
Absolutely. Do you follow the current product? Do you watch WWE, AEW?
I like more sort of underground feeling stuff personally. If it's too much like a Marvel movie, it's kind of a turnoff to me, because I've seen so much better. And the older stuff just seemed to me like you had to think a little bit more, and you had to delve into it a little bit more, rather than it being sort of spoon-fed like a woke cartoon, if that makes any sense. I don't know if I'm describing it well.
You like a little more grit, you're saying.
More grit. That's why I love ECW. And you know, like all good things come to an end, or things get bought out, or this happens or that happens. But the original intent of that was completely off the chain. And it was so much. Yeah. And then, so, you know, they soften it up a little bit, and then they kind of, you know, interweave that into some of the bigger stuff. But I mean, you know, guys like Sabu, I mean, you know, they just literally sacrificing their bodies for the sport. Not unlike Pete Sandoval sacrificing his back and his legs for the music. Right. It's a real thing. So those are the kind of the way that I can sort of correlate between, you know, music and pro wrestling.
Well, let's talk about ECW, of course. You guys have a huge connection to ECW. You wore an ECW shirt in the iconic Where the Slime Lives music video. And I saw a press release that resurfaced recently where you announced like sort of an official partnership with them around that time to play music videos of yours and air, ECW clips over it and, interspeed it, which I think for the time was brilliant because I don't think people realized how much of a connection there was with ECW and underground rock music and underground metal. For me personally, as a teenager, ECW exposed me to so many artists that I would have never found. I mean, I'm sure I would have eventually found them, but I wasn't looking for them until ECW showed me them, and I'm like, oh, this is what I want. When did ECW first come on your radar?
Back in the day, I would search around for the things that, when you're a connoisseur, you look for the best. I got into wing wrestling out of Japan, which was also, pretty edgy in its own way. I mean, Japanese have their own style of doing stuff, but it was interesting. Lots of blood, lots of gore. And, I just started meeting different people and putting myself out there. And it's amazing. You put your antennas up and what you can find when you're seeking it. So I just remember seeing it and trading some VHS tapes with some friends of mine who lived in the Philadelphia area. And, I just liked the fact that it was so edgy and so gritty. It almost reminded me more of the old school stuff, even though the old school stuff didn't have, there weren't Sabus, who were, diving off of what the hell ever into whatever, and the tacks and the, barbed wire and all the rest of it. That's not people who work that hard in that way. Obviously it's considerably more dangerous to do so. So you have to have an awful lot of trust in the person that you're working with, unbeknownst to a lot of people. I mean, and when somebody's delivering a suplex, they're the ones taking the bump just as much as the guy who looks like he's taking the bump, because you have to brace for all this stuff. I mean, talk to Undertaker about how his knees are after, tombstone pile driving. I mean, that's, he probably weighs 300 and some odd pounds. And when he picks somebody up who's weighing, 300-400 pounds himself, that's 700 pounds coming down on their knees. Now, the ring has a little bit of give to it, but that's still 700 pounds. And how often, how long can that last? But for the legacy of the individual doing it. So again, this is where my respect comes from.
Yeah. So you got into ECW, and what I loved about ECW, even as a kid, even as a mark kid who didn't quite know how everything worked, it still felt like, oh, this is real. Like this, like they're hitting each other. There's no way to fake getting hit in the head with a chair or getting ripped with barbed wire, like you're saying, or the kendo sticks. And that really, really drew me to it. Like this kind of like, oh, I don't know if I should be watching. Like this is too much, but I can't look away, Yeah. And honestly, like it made so much sense for an artist like Morbid Angel at the time to team with them, because it was almost like Morbid Angel was to metal what ECW was to wrestling. Like you were the gritty underground band that's kind of bringing these classic styles and like giving it a new barbed wire spin, so to speak. And then so how did that business partnership come together?
Well, it wasn't really a business partnership. I mean, I wear my emotions on my shoulder. I always have, and when I like something, I just get into it. It was never really a thing. As a matter of fact, I remember the attorney from Warner, being really weird about it. He's like, T-shirts with logos, we got to make sure we get permission from that. And,
I see.
Running all the legal clearances and stuff. I said, I'm sure it's fine. If not, I gave him Paulie's number, and he called Paulie. He's like, oh yeah, no problem. Sign off on it. Because they were really like, we're going to have to blur this out, or I'm like, man, just, you guys are thinking one way and I'm thinking about another way, and it's just pure love coming from me. So I don't, I understand that, larger corporations, they get attorneys involved in damn near everything. I mean, how many, probably got somebody stand there, when you go to use the toilet, how many pieces of toilet paper you're using. And it's just everything is just so, manipulated and controlled and contrived. And that's not how I run my life. So this was just something that was kind of just a whim for me. And because I enjoyed just the general sort of brutality and feel of it.
That's cool. So you were in contact with Paul Heyman at the time.
Well, I wasn't in contact with him per se. I got his number from a friend. I said, okay, and I just gave it,
I see.
To the Warner attorney, who, made it happen, because I wasn't about to, well, I'm wearing this shirt and it's not going to be just blurred out as they do in videos when they're such things. So I made it work. It didn't hurt them at all, but, just to give people a leg up. I mean, again, it was just a salutation from me on something that was important to me. So that's what I did.
That's great. And so I'm assuming in 2001, when WCW went under and ECW went under, more tragically in my opinion, it was a dark time for me as a wrestling fan. It was probably the least I had been a wrestling fan at, like, a few years later. WWE was still all right for like 2 years, and then like 2003, 2004, once Austin kind of was injured and The Rock left, it was just not good, and I kind of lost my fandom until I discovered Ring of Honor.
A number of good guys went over there. Yeah, Jerry Lynn, a good friend of mine, he went over there for a while. Yeah, it's just listen, all these businesses are tough. Music business is tough. Mm-hmm. The film business is tough, and certainly the wrestling business is tough in more than one way. And yeah, it's just having the stars that can pull off some of this stuff, like Mick Foley. I mean, you have that guy the mic, and he just comes up with stuff just off the top of his head that, if you're not paying attention and you're in an interview with him, like, he'll purposefully try to trip you up if you're not on the same wavelength. Now, it's just hilarious to watch this stuff.
So do you have go-to favorite matches that you'll put on whenever? Do you have matches that stand out as like your favorites of all time or anything like that?
So not necessarily. I mean, there are good matches, but there's been so many, I usually leave that just to my memory. And then, if something comes up, the vignettes are what I really got a kick out of, especially when Vince Russo was writing. I remember some that just, I can't even believe how funny they were. And, the audience, they thought it was funny. When they have like the backstage stuff that they put on Jumbotron or whatever. I remember distinctly this one time, and I literally fell off my chair. I was laughing so hard. So Big Show is standing at a urinal, and Vltimas comes up next to him. It kind of nonchalantly glances over and starts chuckling. He goes, they call you the Big Show, huh? And it was like, of course, Big Show gets mad and slams him up, it beats him up a little bit. But the fact that was actually allowed on television, as they're trying to become more quote unquote family friendly, that's the kind of shit that just tore me up. I mean, I love it. And, some of the stuff when, Austin had some singers, Rock had some zingers. I mean, Rock really worked on getting to a point, going from the Nation of Domination into, the Rock, and, asking somebody a question and said it doesn't matter what they, the whole, like the anticipation of the audience, going right where it needs to be. And Steve Austin with his what? Stuff. And, you can almost incorporate, it's almost like, in a weird way, I don't know if you're ever a fan of the Jerky Boys.
Of course. Yeah. I love them.
It's all the same. It's how do you stay engaged with the most ridiculous thing in the world and make it remotely believable. And that's an art in my mind. Yeah.
I think Steve Austin is one of the uncredited best comedians of the late 90s and the early aughts. Oh. I had more laughs from him than like any comedian of that time, No,
it's just, again, it's talent. And, outside of the ring, I mean, just creating this character and living that character, there's a million different things that I've just always sort of been into this sort of carnival-esque, circus-y kind of stuff. I mean, it's what I love about Kiss. It's what I love about Insane Clown Posse. It's not necessarily one thing or another. It's just this whole grand entertainment extravaganza. And I'm I'm a pretty jaded person as well. So things, if it just comes across as being kind of haphazard and artificial, I'm not into it. If it comes across as having some prowess or degree of thought behind it, even if it's the most simple thing in the world, when it comes, especially like I said, there's some of these vignettes, some of the interviews. I mean, over the years, there's just people that have been so damn good at it. I still believe Flair has not been outdone. When he was in his heyday, I mean, you can just go on YouTube and watch any of the old stuff from the old NWA stuff, or right when they moved down to and started working with Ted. The guy is just unstoppable, and they're just I haven't seen any stars that are at that quality. Not that they're not that people work hard. It's just different. You know what I mean? Yeah,
exactly. There's a different vibe. Also, Ric Flair didn't have to have a Twitter account in the 80s or whatever, where he's constantly on social media or breaking kayfabe on like what his real life is like, which is why I think part of that isn't quite there anymore. You don't have the mystique as much, and with music as well, really.
No, I agree with that. Lots of things have changed, and they continue to change. And without sounding like an old guy, even though I am, it's just hard for me to buy into so much, because everything is just getting even more sort of contrived. Like, yeah, throughout everywhere in life it is. So I'm curious your opinion on AEW, if you've checked out any matches. I know it's a little polished, but I do think they have some of that Southern wrestling charm that you're saying you've been missing. And like, they can certainly get far more bloody and extreme than I feel WWE does at the time. They recently had a crazy Texas death match with Hangman Adam Page and Swerve Strickland. I don't know if you checked out the pay-per-view, but it got quite bloody. And I think that might be up your alley. Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm really not familiar. There was kind of a point when, I'm still reliving the memories of the glory days, and I've kind of moved to, really redoubling my focus on music. But okay, this is unfortunately it's past tense. Fandom, although I still like small house shows. And this, sort of backyard, startup federations and this kind of stuff. Because I feel like that, these are the guys who are, trying to keep the underground part of it alive, if you will. Yeah, and I think that's where the work really gets done. Like when you go to a big arena to watch WWE, they're playing to the back row. You can't heckle the wrestler if you're in the 200s. Yeah. When you're going to one of these small club shows, you can directly interact with this, right? Like, hopefully you're not being a troll, but I'm saying like it's a much closer connection. And I think for the wrestler, like, that is where they learn their craft, at these small shows, to be able to get 50 people to react in a tiny room where you could hear a pin drop feels much more difficult than being in an arena with thousands of people that are probably more eager to react, Well, so there was a period of time for about 3 years when I was still living in Florida that we actually ran shows at a club there in downtown Ybor City. And because there's, I don't know if your viewers are super aware of this, but there's an awful lot of wrestlers who live in Florida, and thereby also there's an awful lot of wrestling schools in Florida, and a lot of these older guys who literally can't really work the ring like they used to, they set up schools and they try to coach the up and comers. And Steve Kern has a school down there, and pretty much if he's released you, then you know how to work. That was my finding anyway. So we'd get these guys together and run shows once a month and videotape everything and edit the videos and give them to the guys to where hopefully they could send tapes over to Japan or what have you, and try to get bigger work. That's all I ever wanted was for those who had talent and showed eagerness to be able to go on and do the next thing. So we did that for about like I said, about 3 years. Really never made any money, but it wasn't about money. It was just about the fun of and the interaction. But I used to tell the guys, okay, I don't care if they're booing, cheering, or laughing at you. Make sure it's one of those three, because if they literally, if people get up and they want to go buy a beer and they turn their back to you, that means you're not doing your job. So that's what I used to work with them on, to try to help them, find a way to do something that was sort of breaking, in addition to their ring skills. And,
that's so awesome. I didn't know you were a part-time wrestling promoter back in the day.
Yeah.
That's great. And Steve Keirn,
sorry, go ahead. Hobby for me, but it wasn't really about the money. It was more about just the love of the work, man. And at first, so one of my partners, I had two partners, one of whom was a wrestler, and then one who was the actual manager of the venue that we did this. And I'd go back and talk to people, and sometimes it had to come to a point where my one partner, who was a wrestler, he'd go back and tell you guys, listen, this guy has more stage experience than any of y'all do, and if he tells you something and he's trying to help you, you should listen to him, because number one, he loves the sport, and number two, he knows what he's talking about. So it took me, there's still a certain amount of kayfabe amongst the workers, even though the fans are much smarter now than they ever were. But you got to earn respect in there, just like you would in any other form walk of life, right?
Yeah, so absolutely. Yeah,
I'm happy to have earned it from the guys, because they were all really good guys, and they were trained to be somewhat distrusting of people who were not
in the business. Yeah,
part of it.
Which you could understand. I'm sure if like a wrestler came up to you and told you how to play guitar, you'd be like, who the fuck are you? Like your instinct might be to push back on it, Yeah,
I get it. And I took no offense to it. But again, we made some, some of the guys went on to be able to do better. And some of them were just local guys, and they were just happy with that. And that's all they wanted to do. And it's just, they go out and work a show and get some ring time in and maybe make $50. There's really no money in these house shows unless you get, big sponsorship. And in order to get that, then you have to tailor it more towards what the sponsor wants. And, the hell with that. Let's just have a old down and dirty, wrestling program and find a way to enjoy it and everybody have fun. Work out your skill set, and hopefully you can take some tapes that'll make you money at a bigger federation elsewhere.
And you mentioned Steve Keirn. That guy's got an insane story. Talk about old school wrestling, with his dad being a prisoner of war. And then I remember seeing Dark Side of the Ring last year. I don't know if you watched that on Vice, but they just talked about the angle where somebody called his dad, a loser in the storyline. And I could only imagine in the 70s with, the patriotism running so high in Florida, to have a heel like, talk shit on a prisoner of war like that. No. You can't get heat like that nowadays, like even if someone were to do something, were to want to do something like that, no way would WWE or any major company allow that kind of heat, because it would reflect bad on the company now. Like people are, like you said, people are much more aware of kayfabe, and it's like, why is this company scripting this terrible thing? Quote unquote.
At whatever point when Vince was, getting sued for whatever, the off betting crowd. I don't know the whole story, and I may be inaccurate about some of this, but apparently when Las Vegas, trying to get around this sports betting, and when Vince that all of this is scripted, it's just entertainment. That, man, I wish he wouldn't have done that. I mean, those who know, and you just ruin this whole thing for so many people. And if there's something in history that could have happened, I wish he could go back and take that back and just leave it as this sort of hush hush thing, as opposed to just being so. It just takes the mystique away from everything.
Absolutely. Well, I think that either way, like even if he didn't, it would have gotten out by now. Like I remember seeing articles from even 1890, there was like a sports review being like, oh, I wouldn't I wouldn't be so confident in these if these results are real, or like it just, a roundabout way of saying, these matches might be fixed. But I hear your point. Like, I do think that the shows should present themselves as though this is fact. Like, I hate when the show tells you it's fake. Like, it's one thing if it's a interview completely not on the show, but like, it'd be like within Star Wars if Darth Vader turned to be like, oh, you're just watching a movie. Like, no. Like, keep me in this world.
Well, when I was a kid and going to these NWA shows at the Charlotte Coliseum, they stayed in character. I mean, good, but they'd come out, you'd see, by your wrestling program when you go in, and it had all the pictures, and you go up to a heel, and like he was as dismissive as could be, and wouldn't sign pictures, and just be an asshole. I mean, he lived his whole thing exactly the way it was. That they had, if you were a heel, you couldn't be nice.
Like, are there other guys in heavy metal or girls that you talk to about wrestling, be it old school or current stuff? Like, do you have friends that you discuss wrestling with?
Gosh, not much, not so much anymore. Again, back when it was when there was such a thing as Monday Night Raw, and it was Raw not only in title but in metrics
presentation. Yeah.
We'd have Monday nights. I'd have, half the band over and various other people. Most of my friends were musicians at the time, and we just have a ball, or go to a bar that had the pay-per-views, back in that time, because the writing was so good and it kept your attention. Now, I mean, I put it on, I'll watch a little bit, but I just don't feel like I'm, and I feel like the sport has changed. Probably I've changed a little bit as well, but
right.
It's not doing the same thing that it used to for me when I was a kid. Now, when I watch the old stuff, it still does. Hell, I still love the Three Stooges. And, they haven't made any new ones of those since, whatever, 1940s. And that's still hilarious to me. It's just either something has magic or it doesn't. And I'm sorry to say, I'm just not feeling that same.
No, I appreciate that. So like you're saying, you put on old stuff. Let's say tomorrow you have some free time, you're not doing music, and you decide I want to watch some wrestling. What are you putting on? Where are you letting your mind take you?
Well, if you're asking me today, I'd probably go back and dig up some of the old Wing tapes from Japan.
Amazing. Not too many Wing references on the show, so I love that.
Well, I mean, they used to take like horror movie anti-heroes from the States and put them in the ring. They had Freddy Krueger, they had Jason Voorhees, and a lot of times it was Jason versus Freddy in the ring. And even through the masks, they're bleeding out their ass,
Yeah. Also, the guy from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface, right? Like that was a character.
They had Leatherface too. They had, I mean, this is the kind of stuff. Just the stuff that just seems that feels more obscure to me is probably where I'd go these days.
Sounds good. And let's talk about your music. You have a bunch of shows coming up, mostly I think in Europe next year with I Am Morbid. But what could fans expect from David Vincent in 2024?
Actually, we just recorded a new Vltimas record, and the first single drops tomorrow. So that's my sort of my hood ornament these days. But yes, we next year we have some festival dates with both Morbid and Terrorizer. So I'm going to be, juggling hats on some of this stuff. And I'm just looking forward to it. I'm very thankful that the music that I've been a part of over the years still has some relevance.
That's great. And Vltimas, by the way, this is dropping on Wednesday, so by now the Vltimas single is out there, so you can check it out. And that's awesome. And a final question: I'm really on a bit of an industrial kick at the moment. I've been getting into like more European stuff, like Nitzareb, and that one band whose name I cannot pronounce with a lot of syllables. What are some deep deep in, I mean, that's a bad, I should probably look up the name, but what are some more underground industrial bands? Like, do you have any suggestions on where I can go? The worse the drum sound, the better. The faker the drum sound, the better.
Well, so industrial, that's a tough one. I'm not really a fan of genres. I'm a fan of bands. So
I see.
My favorite, and always has been a favorite, is Laibach, even though their newer stuff is almost, I wouldn't really call it industrial anymore, but certainly their older stuff is paved the way. Anything from the mid to late 80s, Laibach, I think would be right up your alley.
Yeah, I was thinking in Sursday Neobaten was the band.
Einstützen Neubauten. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Very not as hard. Nisareb they're kind of an old school. I mean, I'm sure there is stuff today. Again, I don't really follow genres. You know, if I hear something I like, then I'll dig in a little bit deeper. But no one has come to me lately with some example of something that I could, state for you right now and say, I just heard this band, not too long ago.
Well, the band was Leinbach? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
L-I-B-A-C-H, Laibach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Huge band. They've got, I don't know, 20 or 30 records out. So anything.
Just from their promo photos, I'm in. Just from
they're very, very complex sort of mindset that goes into what they do. They made a record that they took the Beatles' Let It Be record and they re-recorded the entire record in their style. And it's
fun.
It's amazing. But that's about all I have to say. These days there's just so much out there to keep track of. I usually just wait until one of my friends says, "Hey, have you heard this? I think you'll like it." And if they know me, and oftentimes I put it on, I'm like, "Huh, I like that a lot. What's the name of this?" All right, and I'll go on iTunes and buy the whole, buy their whole catalog. So I'm always looking for something new, but I just don't have the time to do the looking myself. So I usually just wait until somebody comes to me with something and says, "Oh, you got to check this out. This is amazing." And if it's not amazing, then I take their opinion with a grain of salt. And there's a couple of people who usually they're on mark and they're like, "Yeah, this might be a little different for you, but I think you'll like it." I'm like, "Fuck yeah, I love it."
Awesome. Well, David, thank you so much for your time here. I know you're a busy guy. It was so fun to talk about old school wrestling with you. I've been dying to talk to you about it. And I'm so impressed with the level of knowledge that you have. Like I said, typically, guests that I have on here, it's a pretty rudimentary knowledge. So it's cool to dive deep into Japanese stuff and old school Southern Territory stuff with you. That was really great.
Well, it's always great talking to you, man. Enjoyed it. And hopefully we'll see each other soon.
Absolutely. Make sure to check out the new Vltimas single. I'll link it in the description for sure. And catch David at a city near you sometime soon, hopefully.
All right, brother.
Thanks for entering the pit, David.
Be good, man. Take care.